Welcome back to the podcast. Gabe, Giannis, and I, we are joined by none other than Dr. Kelly Starrett. I love Kelly Starrett. He has been super influential in my life in terms of trying to keep me healthy, whether I was training for the CrossFit Games or even today. When I have something going on, boom, I call Dr. Kelly Starrett. But he's also a husband, he's a father, he's a business owner, and he's currently working with so many different teams. He's a guy that's in the laboratory on a regular basis, and we had to have him on the show to talk mainly today, I'd say, Gabe, about primarily fitness, but there's so much more we could dive into on the next episode with him.
And he's deadlifting 500 pounds at 51 years of age. So
I should have introed him that way. That's what I should have said.
Well, no, I mean, dude, Kelly's a legend. I feel like the guy needs no intro. I've been watching his like mobility YouTube videos since like before YouTube was like a huge thing. It's always for me like so fun to like get on this podcast with people that like I remember just being like, dude, that's Kelly Starrett. But like you said, man, we touched on some topics that I don't think we were even planning to touch on. One, spoiler alert, you know, Kelly loves training with sand, and how appropriate is that, right? Like we literally, cat's out of the bag, sand program is dropping on Tuesday. So a couple days after this comes out, we didn't plan for that at all.
No, we didn't.
Just hearing him talk about how valuable and accessible and indispensable a sandbag is for training, I was just like, I was getting so lit up because like we've talked about this for such a long time, and now we literally have a sand program coming out. So check out the podcast, awesome conversation, but also stay tuned if you're listening to this on Thursday, because next week we are launching sand for Train Hard, and I could not be more excited.
Yeah, you know, the fact that he brought that up, it's almost like it almost made it seem like we were pitching it, but we weren't. It just came through as a natural conversation about how to train kids. And he brought up sand as a great tool. Well, I've also recognized that. And I've also recognized it just being in the training space. And we're super excited to be launching our sand program, a 10-week program. It's badass. But, you know, we want to get into this episode. But before we do, just real quick, leave us a rating, leave us a review on the podcast if you're getting value from this episode, and share it with a friend. And I know it might seem like a big ask, right? But it definitely helps the podcast out. It helps us out a ton. And hopefully it'll also provide more value to your friends and family if you share this episode along that journey. So go back, check out other ones, but most importantly, enjoy this one. Let's dive into it. Great episode with Dr. Kelly Starrett. Let's get it. I got to ask you, Kelly, this is a super serious question. I watched you at like this Carnival thing hit this, like slam this thing that, the Carnival thing where you take the hammer. Yeah. Dude, what is the technique there? Because we just heard that you're about to be turning 51 and you just smashed the hell out of that thing. And I've never been able to do it. So tell me the secret. What's happening? How do you do it?
Well, so first of all, thank you. Second of all, is that I train year round for it. So people understand that like, you don't just walk up and hit the bell, close the hammer. It doesn't just happen. I actually swing a sledge. I swing a mace all the time. And it's one of the things that I feel like it allows me to hit positions. I do it in between sort of work sets. It's sort of dumb work in between when I want to keep my heart rate high, but it allows me to touch shapes and positions and sort of get some left-handed dominant stuff. And so I have this huge on-it mace. It's like the four-headed one, and I slam a slam ball. And I've been doing that for so many years. What you didn't realize, because Juliet didn't capture it, is that there's two hammers. There's actually three hammers at those things. So there's the hammer, it's pretty lightweight. And that hammer makes it real hard because there's no angular momentum. The head of the hammer weighs nothing. And I asked the guy, I was like, hey, is that the child's hammer? And the child's hammer is even lighter and shorter. So I took the child's hammer and closed with the child's hammer, and he laughed at me. Last year, I was like, hey, can I do it with the child's hammer? And he was like, I'll pay you if you can do it with the child's hammer. And I was like, no need, bro, no need. But anyway, I closed it with the child's hammer. What you can see is it actually bounces back, and my hands hit myself in the face. And I jerk out of the way, but I was able to close it because I train year round for it. I'm like, I'm coming for that guy. Because what I asked him one year is, how do you set this thing? He's like, well, if someone closes it, we make it tighter. And so the person behind me is totally screwed.
You know, it's funny when I asked you this question and you said, oh, I've been training year round for it. I like thought that was like a really like I thought that was a joke, right? But the reality is it's not a joke, is that you are using, so I got this one right here, Kelly. I got this. This is a sledgehammer from the CrossFit Games in the spirit of the war.
I was there. I remember that.
I just happen to have this in my office, but no, when you talk about using maces, just to kind of, I have maces in the garage. I also have like a badass looking one somewhere around here. The On It one, like the 4-headed face one.
Yeah, that's the one. It's my favorite.
But I've never really used it that much. Talk to me about the benefit there, because aside from winning Carnival games and getting like a, teddy bear, why do those shapes matter to you? Why do those positions matter to you? I mean, the rotational or what is it?
And Kelly, before you answer that question, I'll tell you a funny story about how much Jason doesn't use the mace. We were filming in his garage like a couple of weeks ago, and I started messing around with it because I've seen a lot of people, use it and do the swings. And Jason looks at me and he's like, dude, if you want that, you can take it home with you.
Really, my wife will appreciate it if you get it out of my garage. So here, let's step back and let's reframe this for everyone. Is that, why am I training? That's the question. Is it right? Is it to burn calories? No. Is it for body composition? No. Right? In terms of being less gross, less fat, right? Like, for me, I just took our dog up on this like 5K loop walk hill. I do that at like 6:30 in the morning, 6:15. And then I try to eat like a human being. I get, I'm a E.C. Sinkowski devotee. I get 1 gram of protein per pound body weight. I eat 800 grams of fruits and vegetables. I mean, this is part of my grams already. I got to get going this morning. I've already had like an orange, a whole bunch of blueberries, eat an apple. So I try to control my weight, my body composition through lots of activity, and then through eating reasonably over the long haul, right? It's a long game. Okay. Why am I training? Well, I'm training because I want to not be bigger. I'm trained, believe it or not now. I'm training because I don't want to be stronger, believe it or not. I'm training because I want to maintain my positions. I want to maintain my current strength levels, which I feel like at age 51 are strong enough to do everything I want to do. In fact, being heavier is actually a detriment to all the things we like to do. Carrying a ruck makes it worse. Being on my bike makes it worse. Paddling, being heavier makes it worse. I'm already like 238 pounds. They didn't tell me that 20 years of CrossFit, it's my 20th year of CrossFit. They didn't tell me that if I lifted heavy under load for 20 years, I would get thicker and thicker and stronger and stronger. They don't tell you that. And it's true. Like, people, you will continue to put mass on with this plan. Even Greg Glass a long time ago was like CrossFit with steroids, CrossFit, bodybuilding with steroids, bodybuilding. Like, that's the order of like putting mass on, right? And you see all our men and women are so strong. So now I look at, hey, during the course of the week, which shapes have I not touched? And there are some core shapes. Don't get me wrong. Like, you got to do pull-ups. I like pull-up is one of my non-negotiables. So you'll see that pull-ups will show up once or twice in my programming every sort of 10 days, right? I'm on like a 10-day cycle. It takes me 10 days to kind of get through all the things I want to get through. I make sure I lunge. I make sure I deadlift and hinge. Yesterday, I'm swinging a 150-pound kettlebell for 3s and 4s in between sets of C-stop press, and then some isometrics. One of the things, though, of the goal of the training is to make sure that I don't get surprised when I'm doing a sport. And that's really what we have all lost the narrative. And I think you all are doing such a good job of saying, hey, remember the gym when it was like 20 to 40 minutes and you were training to be better at a sport? You were training to be better at pickleball. You were training to be better at jits. I'm training for sports these days, and bike riding is my chief sport. But I also have a whole bunch of other things I like to do. And if I don't touch certain shapes, then I'm going to end up potentially with a ligament or a tissue system that isn't ready to go. And so it's not that I'm in this kind of prepper mode where I'm like, I need to do more pull-ups so I can do more pull-ups so I can do more pull-ups. But I find that swinging that mace asks my forearms to rotate, and I have to be in shapes and positions where it bounces. I have to catch it in a weird shape. I have to do a lot of rotation work, but that doesn't mean like I'm swinging like a halo around my head or throwing a medicine ball. I do so much rotation through the trunk. What I'm saying is, hey, am I taking my joints and my tissues into their normative ranges? For example, I ask people that I work with, I'm like, oh, you're doing pull-ups? Great. How many chin-ups can you do? And they're like, well, I haven't done a chin-up since Vietnam. I'm like, well, I learned a long time ago from one of my original coaches, Greg Glassman, that this grip needed to equal this grip. You'll have your best grip. Like you can do the most pull-ups in this position. You cannot do the most pull-ups in this position. But what I find is that people can no longer even hang from a pull-up bar with a chin grip all the way down. Their pinkies come off. They have to do all this weird stuff, right? And so a lot of what we're realizing is in the course of the training that we like to do for get my heart rate high, maintain my strength, work on my power, I can also be creative about tissue exposure and range of motion exposure. So swinging a mace turns out to be a wonderful way sometimes to be in a overhead position, in a short lever, elbow bent. It's just a wonderful way to work on exposing the triceps in these positions. I don't like to do skull crushers. I just don't do them. But I swing a mace and I swing a heavy rope around a lot. What that does is it exposes my arm to overhead with elbow bent, and it asks me to have all of this rotation in the forearm so that I don't end up with a hot elbow or I don't end up with a hot wrist. And that's what I'm trying to do is I train longer and say, hey, I got this much time. Where can I put in these shapes and some of these movements? And I don't have to touch them very often. I just don't want to be surprised when I just got off of 4-day class 4 river trip and I'm kayaking. I basically go off the couch to the kayak, and I want to make sure that I don't get surprised by yanking on a paddle to big class 4 whitewater.
I got to ask on that note, right? Where are you at currently, Kelly? One of the things I actually wrote down that I want to talk to you about is like, what have you changed your mind on? So you and I, we met a long time ago, like at this point, maybe even close to 20 years ago. And since then,
everyone knows, I watched you win the CrossFit Games. I was standing right there. I watched you win the CrossFit Games. Everyone was cheering for everyone else. And I was like, hey, so much to look at that guy over there. I was literally like, who's that guy? That guy is winning and you won. And I was standing right there.
Oh man, that was good time. So we've known each other forever, and if you go back into the archives, I remember there was like building Khalipa or something like that on Mobility WOD. And I remember I came out, you had such a cool setup. So for people who don't know this, Kelly and his wife, Juliet, and the entire family, like they live, breathe, and they walk the walk, they talk the talk. I mean, these guys are just out there working with all kinds of different groups. We already talked about this in the intro, but I think that what was most interesting for me is that you had that like outdoor, storage unit next to the sports basement in San Francisco, right on the Presidio. Like, dude, it was just epic. And you had some of the best coaches coming through there. And I went out there and we did like some ankle mobility, some different tools. It's a long time ago. This is like well over 10 years ago. And my question is, from when the beginning, when you started Mobility WOD and you put out a daily video that really was like the first of its kind to follow along mobility work, in my opinion, yeah, 100%. You revolutionized it, in my opinion. What have you changed your mind on in terms of like when you were that to now with the ready state? What have you changed your mind on in terms of mobility, in terms of what athletes should be doing from then until now? Or is it still the same for you?
Well, it's interesting is that, what we started to recognize a long time ago is that people working out did not have a plan to do something we call reduce session cost. So let me give you an example. I work with, Go Bears. I'm working with the California water polo team for the last year and a half as sort of a high performance, assistant person, right? I come in and my job is to look at, and I'm answering the question, don't go wrong. So look at how do we have our athletes work harder? And more importantly, reduce the session costs from the work. So if you and I do a workout, everyone knows we're going to train together. You'll destroy me, right? And then what we'll see is how we adapt to that exercise. That exercise is going to make us weaker and slower and more tired and fatigued. And it's our adaptation to that exercise. But it's not just about adaptation and recovery. It's what are all the behaviors I can put in so that I can reduce the cost to my CNS, reduce the cost to my being able to generate force the next day, reduce the cost potentially disrupting my sleep. What are the sets of behaviors I can engage in to help me pay a less of a training price? And anyone, if you don't know what I'm talking about, if you were a newbie, a newer athlete, and you jumped in with Jason, we would do the same workout and I would be wrecked as a new person for maybe a week. And Jason would be like, I think I'm going to train tonight and do a second session. And that's because Jason is going to pay a less cost to that. Some of that is obviously just strength and conditioning and training age and all the things. But as an allegory, that tells us that you didn't have to pay quite the emotional, physical, psychological costs that I did. So at the highest levels of sports and performance, there's a rule now that, like, it used to be, we'd say, you know, you can outwork the competition. You cannot outwork the competition. That ship has sailed. You know, Stanford, Cal, USC, Michigan, these teams are all working just as hard. And so this notion that you'll just outwork the competition, that was from the 1990s, or that's for beginners. That's super cool, like high school athletes, pew, pew. Well, now what we're looking at is who can do the most work, be the freshest, pay the less cost, so that we can work harder tomorrow. And it's really important that we're thinking about that, because over time, my teams will get more work done than your teams, which means we will be fresher and our work volume will continue to outstrip you over the course of days, weeks, months, and years. And yes, then we will continue to be able to do more work than you, but it's not because we have more time or we have some secret scroll program. So what I've come to realize is how all of these other behaviors, look, when I was in my 30s, you know, when we met, I was super into winning world championships, right? Like setting world records. And we're still doing that. Next week, I'm flying down to work with the All Blacks at the U.S. Olympic Training Center, right? Like, I'm still in it, very much in it. I'm working with the University of Michigan. I'm still in it, like football. Like, I still am like, here's my hypothesis. Can we go harder? Can we have you? But part of that language is mechanical efficiency. So if you can't put your arms over your head without bending your elbows and internally rotating, you're just going to be less efficient than my athlete who has access to her full range of motion, or my athlete who can flex his hip more effectively, or my athlete who isn't as stiff or doesn't have to pay sort of a mechanical efficiency cost, or my athlete who looks at their nutrient timing and engages in a bunch of behaviors that helps her or him fall asleep faster and sleep more densely. So a lot of what I've evolved on is I've gotten a lot more sophisticated about saying, hey, mobility is about range of motion and about reducing DOMs and about solving pain. That's those reasons why we mobilize. And what I say now is I'm like, hey, we really need to look at your lifestyle. So I'm working with a two-time world champion surfer. He is leading the World Cup right now, John Florence. And when we started working with John, he'd come after a couple of knee injuries. And what I'll say is that a lot of the things that John thought he was working for him, weren't serving him as well as he could. And so one of the things I did is come in and say, hey, tell me about your sleep. Tell me about your nutrition. Tell me about how you train and get ready for the season. And those are the dials that we end up turning, not some secret hip mobilization exercise. Is seeing that, hey, tissue quality matters massively. And the reason I had to get involved and excited about hydration, and I had to get excited about fiber and micronutrients and protein is I'm like, those are the substrates that make up your tissue. And if you don't want to have a tendon that gets pissy because you went for a hike off the couch, we need to make sure that you have everything on board, including sleep, and do you feel safe in your relationships, and is your brain not stressed? Can we do all of that so that we can work harder, and then you do what you want to do with your body in a pain-free way? So that's what I've said. I would say that I've spent a lot of time thinking about who owns these problems, where are we going to do this stuff, right? Because if you go to a CrossFit gym now, it's not 215-9, do some glute ham sit-ups and maybe chase a lift and get out. It's 1A, 1B, 1C. Now we're in the second part of the workout. The training is dense. Like, try to get through your, when you guys were doing like competition programming, you can't get it done in an hour. It's a 90-minute plus session. And that's the first session of the day, right? The second session of the day is another 90-minute training session. So I think what's happened is that the training has become so dense that we're asking, how can we give agency back to the athlete? Where and when are we going to put these things in? So, for example, for everyone, if you're following along, I believe that all of the soft tissue work in the world belongs in front of your TV in the evening before you go to bed. That is the easiest way. We want you to sit on the ground while you're watching TV for 20 or 30 minutes. If you're sitting on the ground, then you're long sitting, side sitting, kneeling. You're in all of these positions, and we're spending 30 minutes at end range, hip range of motion. That's so cool. But then I'm like, oh, look, what's right there next to the couch? It's the roller. And you're like, well, okay, I'll get into my T-spine, or I'll roll my calves, or I'll get on my quads for a few minutes, or I can sit on my coffee table and take care of my adductors. But suddenly, what we're doing is we're moving some of the soft tissue into the evening, where we're going to see athletes do it more often because they're not making a choice about, do I eat lunch or do I mobilize, or do I play a game or mobilize, or do I train to mobilize? It's, hey, I'm going to recover in the evening. We found athletes fall asleep faster. They stay asleep longer. They can ask what sore, what hurt in today's session. We can then program to it right away. So again, a lot of what we're trying to do as I go into these team environments to say, where are we going to put these best behaviors in a 24-hour duty cycle the most often, where we can be the most consistent? And that's where I'd say I've gotten a lot more sophisticated and grown and more mature. Like, no one has 30 minutes in the gym to roll around on the ball.
All right, we're taking a quick break from the podcast to talk about what we have coming up on the Train Hard app in the month of July. So we're halfway through the year, which means that all the programs on the Train Hard app are entering a new training phase for the months of July, August, and September. So if you've been waiting, if you've been thinking about joining the Train Hard app, now is a great time to do it, because we're turning the page on the first half of the year and going into brand new focuses. Force is going to be focused on building some raw strength in the back squat, the deadlift, and the bench press. We're also going to be working on developing some strength in some body weight movements, the pull up, the dip. So just a lot of really great structured strength work, as well as the conditioning to make sure that you keep that engine going strong. So a lot of strength focus in Force. So if you're trying to get strong this summer, absolutely something to check out. And then on the flex side, we have a brand new training phase as well. And that first 6-week cycle as part of that training phase is going to have a big focus on these giant sets. So 5 exercises per muscle group that you'll do in quick succession. So you'll do something like a bench press, then you'll go dumbbell bench press, then you'll go incline dumbbell bench press, then you'll do dips, and then you'll do push-ups back to back to back. The pump on these sessions is unreal. And I promise you, if you're trying to build muscle, if you've struggled to put on a little bit of weight, this is going to be the way to do it. This is going to be the way to improve your body composition. I'm super excited. And then the last thing is we now also have past cycles of Flex available as an ebook. So if you're just not trying to download another app, you don't want to be on a monthly subscription, you can now access Flex specifically by going on the Train Hard shop and purchasing the ebooks for either just a 6-week cycle or the full first training phase of the year. So highly recommend checking that out. Highly recommend getting on the Train Hard app. Let's get strong. Let's get big. Now let's go back to the podcast. When Kelly, when you talk about, session cost and stuff like that, and beginners and stuff, we have a lot of people that come to our app, come to our training. I get this question a lot in email too, that are either coming back from an injury or like getting started again. What's a good way for them to modulate that session cost? Because we all know that we don't want someone to try and do what Jason's doing first day back, because the point isn't to do something really hard today and not be able to do something again for another week, 2 weeks, because many times then it doesn't happen. It's like, oh, well, isn't for me. And then you end up spending another year or 2 years before you want to get back into it again. So
I don't want to be that sore again. I don't ever want to be that sore again.
Right. So what are some good, like, how would you answer that question? Hey, I'm either coming back from an injury or just haven't been on it. Like, I'm super excited now, read an email, saw the program. I love it. Day one's tomorrow. How do you guide that person to do that effectively? And what role does some of the things you talked about, like mobility at night and stuff like that, play into it versus just like not biting off more than you can chew when you start?
So let's unpack that in a couple different ways. It's such a common experience for so many people, right? I'm starting, I know I need to lift weights, I'm getting older, whatever it is, right? We've gotten that message out. The first thing I want to say is, hey, let's look at your training as you're training. Again, what I said, like, I'm not going in to burn calories so that I can eat ice cream and drink beer. Like, that's wrong. We're training because we need to get stronger. We need to have better conditioning and power and work. Like, that's why we're training. We're building huge cardio aerobic demands, right? The amount of steady state aerobic work that Jason does, he was one of the first people on it, do so much aerobic monostructural work. I use something with everyone that I work with, especially after injury, called the Morpheus. It's a strap made by Joel Jameson. And what happens is one of the things I use an Oura ring, and it's fine, but I don't like paying a subscription. That kills me. So the strap does a couple things. One is it takes my HRV. I'll have to just buy the strap one time. The app is free. It takes my HRV in the morning after a full night's sleep and resting heart rate, right? I can do all of these things, but also it asks me, how do I feel? What's going on? And it adjusts my heart rate zones for the day. That's cool, right? Or I can say, hey, I just been on a train today, and it'll default to some heart rate zones. But what's important is that we want to look at how much work you're doing over a week or over however long your sessions are, or your kind of whatever the program is. Most people are training in sort of week blocks. And what's great about that heart rate monitor strap that I wear during my exercising, it starts to aggregate how much time I'm spending in these different zones. So up to 80%. So that's still, for a lot of people, huffing up to 80% of their max heart rate is, they call that recovery. So, which means that I can do a lot of CrossFit workouts. I can get on my bike. I can go for a light jog. I can ruck. And I'm trying to get 120 to 190 minutes a week. That's over 2 hours of this sort of easy, low-fee, cardio, fantastic zones. I only get like 20 minutes, up to 16 minutes sometimes for my age, advanced age, of 80 to 90%. And I only get 2 to 4 minutes above 90%. So this old idea of just like, just throttle down, what we'll see is that I'm looking at, one, how can I maintain these aerobic kind of ranges? So again, I'm answering your question. When we remove the need to burn calories, and I'm exercising to look better, and now I'm teaching people, we're going to get you to look better by getting you to walk more and eat differently, right? You're going to be so stuffed with all the food you have to eat this week. You're going to hate it. And then simultaneously, hey, let's get a bunch of non-exercise activity things, because you don't actually burn that many calories. The first time I became aware of this is actually, we were talking about the zone at my first level 1 back in 2004. Right. This is when I went to my first level 1 CrossFit, and everyone was like, "Hey, if I CrossFit, I probably need to add like 5 or 6 more blocks." Right. And Craig was like, "Yeah, I actually burned like 230 calories, or maybe 300 calories. So you don't have to add any calories, any additional calories to your training." One of the reasons I still love CrossFit, everyone, is that I don't have to eat 1 million calories in order to do CrossFit. I can basically eat my current sort of eating, and I end up running a little bit of a deficit, maybe, because I don't have to eat like I'm on a bike for 2 hours or 3 hours, which is very different. As soon as I do a 2-hour ride, or like, I'm like, I better start eating to maintain this thing, otherwise I tank. But I can go out and CrossFit fasted. I can go out and CrossFit like sort of in a medium fed state. So that's great. So what we're trying to recognize then is, if I'm trying to use this for training, then it's really important that I feel good when I leave the session. That's the number one thing. Do I feel like I could still play a sport today? I could still gain in some activity. Hey, I'm going to go play a pickup basketball game. If you have trained, you're a beginner, and you come home and you're laying on the ground and you're dead, you overshot.
I'm so glad you said that.
It's so normal. I want you to leave the gym and be like, I could have done more. I should have done another round. And in a month or so, or 2 months or 3 months, knock yourself out. Hey, I don't have to do anything today. I'm going to go hard in the paint. Again, remember, I get 2 to 4 minutes a week of bleeding through the eyeballs. That's it, right? So when we're coming back, what's nice is, doesn't mean I'm not going to crush you on the assault bike. Doesn't mean we're not going to work hard, but I'm still going to be feeling good when I leave. So that one is that I feel great. When I leave here, I'm not lactic. Let me just tell you a quick anecdote. So my girls have been CrossFitting for their whole lives, right? Georgia was like 1 year old when we opened the gym, and Caroline was born into CrossFit. And I sort of take for granted sometimes the fact that they can suffer. So Caroline is a pretty good goalie. She's a sophomore. She's kind of a superstar. She's 5'11". She's a monster, right? 15-year-old. And yes, she can Olympic lift, and yes, she can pull snatch at 5'11" and 15. And we were just working on her leg speed on the bike, right? We're just peak speed. Take the Concept 2 damper down to 1, no resistance. There's still a lot of resistance there, I understand, on the Concept 2 bike. But she's pushing like 145, 146 RPMs. Like we work on peak RPMs. So we're just working on peak speed. As soon as the speed comes down, we're done. So it's usually just like a 5 or 6 second ramp and then hold it, peg it. So this is just warm up. We're working on leg speed, neurologic efficiency. Her best friend jumps in and does 5 of these rounds with us, or 4 of these rounds, and becomes so sick, so lactic sick, doing these 5 little sprints on the bike, 5-second sprints, that she has to go into our house, lay down on the ground, and just like come down. And this kid plays soccer. Caroline then goes outside for the main course, which is peak wattage on the assault bike. Yeah, we're trying to get her for 20 seconds, these efforts. And then she's doing like gnarly Zercher marches and then recovering. And we do like 6 to 8 of those. So what I'm saying is, here we have a kid who's fit, but untrained. Here we have a kid whose exposure to her life and over time means that she can handle these work volumes and not be sick. It was a mistake for me to give her friend this dose where the kid ended up feeling terrible and couldn't work out with us. That's the mistake we all make as adults. When you're coming back after an injury, slightly different ideas here is that, hey, what we need to do is make sure that your brain perceives these movements as safe, that we're starting to put you on basic linear progressions. So I'm a huge fan of the linear progression. So a linear progression means that we're going to do the same movement, but we're going to add just a little bit of weight every week or every session. So sometimes if you're in physio with me, we're going to squat 5 times a week, 3 to 5 times a week. And we're going to add 1 pound to these 5x5s or whatever rep scheme we're using. And in the beginning, it's super, super light, but in 3 weeks, it's so gnarly, you can't handle it, right? So we use these little incremental gains. I use the same thing in my programming for couplets. I'm still such a fan of EMOMs. So let's use the EMOM. You're like the greatest EMOMer of all time. You're like Captain EMOM. An EMOM for someone with linear progression means, hey, I'm going to do, one of my favorites is a heavy deadlift every minute. I love that. And I'll mess around. I'll do some pull-ups. I'll walk on my slack line, right? But this is like, hey, I don't need a lot of warm-up. I'll start my EMOM, build as I go, right? I have good training. I know where I'm going to try to hit. So a simple EMOM for me would be, I'm going to pull something heavy. Right now I'm working on I can pull 500 on the deadlift every minute for about 15 minutes. And then I start to fall apart, right?
Man, I'm disappointed in you, Kelly. 500 at 50.
But the idea here is, if I'm just giving you a reference, like an old guy. The reference here is, let's say that my daughter, Georgia, is doing an EMOM. She loves deadlift EMOMs. But what we'll do is we'll just add a little weight the next time. Or we'll add a second rep the next time. So suddenly she's doing 2 reps on the minute. Then she's 3. So we can continue to progress. And what I always want people to do in these sessions, because this is one of the ways I program, is that I'll keep a couplet, an EMOM idea for like 3 or 4 weeks. And then what I do is I continue to build on it for those 3 or 4 weeks. And then I'll swap it out for a different couplet. Right now, one of my current couplets is ski erg and sandbag thruster, right? I can add calories to the sandbag, or calories to the ski erg, or time to the ski erg, or I can add reps to the sandbag. So suddenly what's great about this is that I can make these little progressions. So if people understand that we're going somewhere for the next 3 weeks, then it's okay that we have these days where I'm working on my positions, I'm working on my shapes, I'm working on control, and we're going to add to it. And I always want to say, hey, just let's make sure that we're leaving something in the tank. We're going to hit this again next time. So again, the rules are, if you went so hard that you maxed out and you're beginning out, that's a mistake. If you didn't feel good when we left, that's a mistake. If you wake up tomorrow and feel like there's no way I can train, and 2 days later, there's like no way I can train, that's a mistake. So those are sort of my basic guidelines. Again, just to reiterate, I feel great. I can't wait to do that tomorrow. Tomorrow comes around, I still want to do it again. Next day comes around, I still want to do it again. Good, then we can talk about a day off, or we can continue to do something else or put in some aerobic training. Again, with the way I think about progressing, did I leave myself room to add a rep or add calories or add load? And then suddenly what we see is that, boy, over time, we're going to get there. And I think that's a way of thinking about programming in a reasonable way. I'm going to travel for work. I had to go to Italy. I had to go to the East Coast. I had 2 weeks of weird training. I immediately dropped down to something that I think for me is sub-threshold, and then I'll build myself back up again. So I use the same thing for my advanced athletes who are coming out of season, who are very conditioned, as we start to expose them again.
One of the things I brought up this last Saturday at the men's club, and Gabe, I may want to add something, but one thing I said, I was like, guys, if this is your first time at the men's club, like, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Our intention is to help you train hard here so you can show up for your family later on today, tomorrow, the next day, go play with your kids. Yes. If you get so sore that you can't get off the toilet or that you can't move and you have to lay on the couch for the rest of today, like, that's exactly what I don't want this training to do. So that was the way that I kind of am starting to frame it. And I'm glad you said what you said. And Gabe and I, we talk about this a lot about, the role training plays. And I love your talk about linear progression, because Gabe's been doing a really good job with our flex program. And he's been really doing like these progressive plans. I mean, he could talk about it.
Well, and let me say, imagine if we took this out of training and health and we put it into smoking weed or drinking alcohol.
Okay.
Never smoked weed or drank alcohol ever. Great. Here's 3 bottles of wine and 6 shots. Here, I need you to smoke this pound of weed. Dude, you don't even know how your body's going to react to this. Right. So let's go ahead and just apply common sense to the fact that, like, I've never had cake before. Let's eat 3 cakes. Dude, you're going to vomit. So let's take it back a second, right? Foie gras is so amazing. Give me a pound of foie gras, bro. Put it down. Like, you know what I mean? So I think people have intuitively these ideas. I don't know. I should take it easy. Let's go ahead and just give ourselves some exposure so we know where we are. The follow-up question, Gabe, is important. Is the other thing that I always talk about with people is, let's make sure that we're doing the things we need to do to support reducing session costs and maximizing your adaptation. So the first one is, if you plan on doing this, are you sleeping, right? Tell me about that. Because if you're only getting 6 hours of sleep and then we're adding this other stressor, 5 hours, and we're adding this other stressor and burning you down, hey, instead of saying we're not going to do anything today because you only had 5 hours of sleep, I'm like, great. We're going to have you go walk for 45 minutes with this ruck. And I just want you to walk around your neighborhood or feel good. That's a day where we're going to put in some of this recovery cardio. So we'll go ahead, and I like to program. And again, I'm a maniac. When I was training for Molokai, this is an example. It was the Molokai crossing. I was doing the Molokai solo. We paddle from Molokai to Oahu. It's like a 50K open ocean race. The person who did my programming was a 2-time Olympic medalist in rowing, Erin Cafaro. And she would build these programs for me. And she would be like, hey, I want you to get this work done. And I was like, so my life is crazy. Give me the week's worth of work. I'll fit it in when it works for me. So I really feel fresh today. I'm going to do the hardest workout. I'm a little bit smashed today. I'm going to do the easiest workout. And so I would just go ahead and move them around. And we can't do that with 100 people. We can't do that in a class. You're going to show up. We can't do it with a team. But individually, what this meant was that I was able to sort of choose the workout intensity volume that matched my ability to be up on my sleep, up on my nutrition, all those things. And I think that's what we're also trying to get people to say, how do I feel today? Oh, the frying pan's hot. Let's go cook, right? Oh, you're a little bit burned. Hey, let's do some easy deadlifts and a little bit of just some easy, aerobic work. And then we're still going to train today. I want people to understand that, but we're not going to make it so that you can adapt to the trainings effectively.
I think the challenge here is that, we're very aware of kind of like our bodies and how training is going to make us feel. And that's come with time and experience and trial and error and making the mistake millions of times. I think that the challenge comes with a lot of people that don't have that awareness, kind of, I feel like, end up falling into 1 or 2 buckets. Bucket number 1 being like they don't go hard enough, right? Like they do need someone to kind of be like, hey, you got to push a little bit more here if you actually want to get some results. Like they're not even spending the 4 minutes that you said a week actually getting what was the term you used, like, bleeding through their eyeball. So how do you kind of encourage that in a safe dose. And then I feel like the other bucket is the person that's just like, hey, if I'm not working hard enough, I'm not getting results. And I think that I feel like we get more of that bucket in kind of this community and the train hard community, because I know that people get very excited and want to come back in. And when they hear you say stuff like, hey, you should finish the session and feel good, sometimes people mistake that with, it didn't feel like I did enough. And so
they're used to exercising, they're not used to training. Or they're used to fitnessing, where the metric is subjective suffering, not actual objective measurements of power, of wattage, of poundage, right? And we have to re-educate people that it's actually, let me give you an example. If I take a real big, strong, conditioned athlete and I throw them in an F45 class or an Orange Theory class, they'll die because they can perform so much work. When we first started CrossFitting everyone, we were all rate limited by the fact that we weren't very strong and we weren't very fit. So what ended up happening was that 45 reps of something might take us a long time because we actually weren't very strong and very fit. Now suddenly we're coming in and people are monsters. And if I open it up to this fitnessing, exercising, my strong athletes will do so much volume, they will be destroyed. And that's the difference between the fitness industrial complex and actual GPP, general physical preparedness training, actual sports preparation training, actual sports specific training. You have to draw the line in the sand. People, we are not fitnessing. We are not exercising as entertainment, right? If you want to exercise as entertainment, go to a Zumba class. Super fun, probably won't do so much volume that you die, right? But if you're a big, strong athlete and I throw you into Orange Theory, you're going to kill yourself. And so one of the things that we have to do is we have to have this conversation. This is training that you've never done before. And I know that you expect to feel like you should be depleted and emptied and talking to your Lord and Savior. That is not what training looks like. That is not at all. And it's one of my beefs with CrossFit. And one of the reasons that CrossFit hasn't been fully adopted by athletes in sports is that hour of training now is so dense and so hard, the athlete can no longer stand up and do her sport. And that's a mistake. So now, don't get me wrong, we all use CrossFit templates and ideas to train athletes, but we don't do the kinds of programming we're saying we're going to meet all your movement needs, all your conditioning needs, every need in this hour, and then you can sit on the couch the rest of the day. That's what training and fitness has become, instead of I'm training for something.
Man, it's so funny you mentioned that Orange Theory thing. I took an Orange Theory class probably a year and a half ago.
You can die.
I've never been so messed up because you treat it like a 60-minute AMRAP and you come out of there and you're like, I've never done a 60-minute workout. Like we do 15 to 20 minutes. That was insane. So it's funny you mentioned that.
Kelly.
Yeah, and in order to get your heart rate high, you who have a big engine, dude, like if I take some middle-aged person who's never exercised before, they walk on the treadmill there in the Orange. Meanwhile, you're sprinting 4-minute miles and try to keep yourself pegged, and you're like, I'm dying.
Kelly, I know we've talked about this briefly in the past when we got on a podcast with Hinshaw, but I feel like at least around me, and it's part of my echo chamber, I guess, around here. Right now, my son is really involved with baseball. And I know that your girls have played sports forever and you're ahead of me. So I always look to people ahead of me to kind of guide some of the certain things. And you and I have talked about this kind of stuff.
I don't want to make all the mistakes Kelly's made. That is a good life.
No.
That is seriously, that makes good sense.
Yeah, well, I definitely want to talk about having the boyfriends stay over at the house when they're younger. That's a whole different ballgame. But no, while we're on the training subject, I think this is important. A lot of the guys, because my son now is playing travel baseball, he was just on like an all-star team. Like it's a more competitive ecosystem. Yeah. Starting at this age around 10, I'm starting to see a big shift, right? And my question for you is, now parents are asking me, Caden's built a little bit bigger and he's definitely got some strength on him. They're asking me like, what am I doing to train Caden and self-defense, but also just strength conditioning? And there's always this stigma that goes along with it. That weight training or training in general is going to stump the kid's growth. And so my question for you is, I mean, even at a baseline for these baseball players, many of them, I don't think could get into a position of a full range of motion push-up or a full range of motion squat. It's just body weight. So,
That's right.
So where does weight training fall into play with kids? And what would you prioritize if you had a youth, 8, 9, 10 years old who wants to go out and play traditional sports, but wants to obviously have a well-rounded approach with their fitness?
So the way we think, so first of all, the research does not support any injuries. In fact, the research supports that kids who train have fewer injuries and actually do better in the long haul. And part of it is kids are now doing specialization is a feature, not a bug. If your child is going to be successful, there's going to be a lot of pressure for that child to move year round, to play year round and play 1 or 2 sports year round. What I'll say is that we always just pointed the finger at just be a multi-sport athlete, it solves all the problems. I'm like, does it? Because now you're just adding a different kinds of volume, intensity in there. And what you're not really looking at is sleep, nutrition, right? Some of the basics. But then we start to add in, hey, what are foundational skill movements? Like if your child can't flip upside down and do a handstand against the wall, I'm like, is your child that elite? If your child can't do scaled push-ups with good mechanics, right? Warming up, finding a plank, squeezing the butt, lowering back down, snaking back up. What we see is, wow, your child doesn't even have sort of these movement skills or scaled motor skills. So how can we begin this conversation? The problem is that if we don't get kids moving the way the pressure of these individual sports are, we need to now view strength and conditioning in the garage, is where I think this belongs, as another sport where we're going to touch positions and shapes that the child may not have access to, right? Look, we don't have to load it up very heavy. I give your kid a 5-pound sandbag and we do single foot or rear foot elevated split squats. You're going to find out that your child is not the next coming of LeBron James. You're going to find out that your child can barely balance standing on one leg. So what we're seeing is we have these, I call it skilled conditioning, where I use aerobic work to make movements harder, right? That's one way thing I do. Hey, we're going to just sprint power, and then we're going to go do this thing. So by breathing hard, cardiorespiratory demand, metabolic demand, I can reduce the load and mimic the sport piece, right? Put the kid into a little bit of like challenge. We play the fish game for a minute. It doesn't matter what it is, right? Skier, fish game, and then let's go ahead and do some push-ups. But what we see is that the model is already solved for us in terms of strict movements, strict push-ups, strict pull-ups, handling a sandbag, step-ups, lunging, things that look like classic strength and conditioning. Every child I work with can swing a kettlebell. It's one of my foundational movements. Every child I work with can press something over her head. Every one of them, right? It might be a bamboo shaky bar. It may be dumbbell seesaw press. They're all the things. If we just handed children dumbbells and said, here are our foundations, let's use 5x5 as a template. Let's use 8 sets of 3 as a template. Let's get 20 minutes of skilled movement in more often. What we'll start to see is real change. And what you'll find is that if we make this statement, and please put this on the internet, strength training is resistance training with coordination. But let me say it again. Good strength training is coordination training with resistance. So if we look at what we're trying to do with children, which we're trying to make better movers, we're trying to give the brain movement problems to solve. This is why I would never take a child and put her in a machine, right? I'm like, no. I want to make it so your brain is working hard to solve this movement problem. But then all I'm going to do is add some resistance to make the coordination problem that we're trying to solve in the gym more interesting. And suddenly what we're really doing is we're developing coordination in a very controlled manner in these fundamental patterns and fundamental movement ways. And then lo and behold, we can start to scale that with load and speed and volume, et cetera. So here's something like, I think that the sandbag and the child, that is a match. The sandbag is so cheap. It means that we can get kids loaded without barbells, without having 1,000 dumbbells. Sandbags are cheap. But we have some sandbags, and we'll have Caroline just do a front squat. And then She presses over her head, but as she's pressing over her head, she's stepping that front foot onto a box. So she's going from a flex pattern position to full extension. And then one of those legs goes into actually hip extension as she steps onto the box. And so suddenly by saying not what's the heaviest front squat you can do with this sandbag, Caroline, I'm like, hey, I need you to solve this problem by pushing this over your head, balancing and moving through the world, right? That's how we start to think about this. A person I would point you to is Frans Bosch. Frans Bosch is a Dutch strength conditioning coach who really has put strength training into the coordination sort of landscape. He uses a lot of bags that like have the water in them. He uses that. And those are easy ways to start to get our kids movement exposure without just saying, what's your kid's bench reps? Like, come on, like your child, a push-up for a child is like, would I take an untrained adult and say, let's load your body weight up on this bench press and see how many times you can bench it? That's what we're doing when we do push-ups with children, right? So let's go ahead and think differently about what we're trying to do. We teach squeezing the butt and warming up. Every kid can plank. We lower ourselves to the ground. We try to learn how to control these things. Those are our push-ups that we're doing. And then we got to gamify it. We got to keep it tidy, but you probably have 20 or 30 minutes. You can go explore these things in your gym with your family. That's the revolution that needs to happen.
How much of a hurdle are the parents in making this like a more mainstream thing? Just because obviously it's not the kids that are making the decision of like looking for a strength coach or like doing these movements. How much of it is the fact that like parents aren't valuing like strength conditioning for themselves, so they don't see the value? And so it's easy to say, well, I don't want to stunt my kid's growth. Or it's also, maybe tough for them to hear something like, hey, my kid isn't the next coming of LeBron James because he can't do a Bulgarian split squat. One thing we talk about a lot on the podcast is youth sports ends up unfortunately turning to be a lot about the parents, right? Like it becomes so much about like, you want to be the parent of the star kid because that feeds your ego, and it stops being about like your child like enjoying the game, loving the game, gaining athleticism, and becomes more about like, the college hat that you can wear because your kid made it to the program. So how much in your experience specifically, and Jason, I'm curious your thoughts, are the parents a hurdle in making this like a bigger part of making our kids more athletic and more prepared for sports?
I'll take this one first. First of all, let's turn that on its head and let's say, imagine as a parent, you don't have any trainer exposure here. Where are you getting your information? From the internet? It's overwhelming. What should my child be doing? Right? So everyone is a product of their training and their experience. And we're going to see a generation of kids now who've grown up singing kettlebells. I know some schools that are becoming very sophisticated around their movement that they're teaching. They're recognizing, PE programs are starting to recognize that kids aren't getting free play, which has gone away. And so they're doing a lot of balance and vestibular drills as in, hey, this is what the brain needs to continue to develop these pieces. So number one, remember that a lot of parents come from the place where they don't have any exposure to this. And that's really important to say. Say, hey, I understand that you feel overwhelmed. Second piece here is, what I want every parent to do is become the performance director for their child, which means you may have to say, no, we're not going to that. Or, you're not sleeping. And right, like we're starting to set up benchmarks that if we want to do these things, let's go ahead and make sure that we're actually taking care. And Jason, as you go to these baseball tournaments and watch parents, what kind of food do they bring?
Right. Yeah. What are you, and then what fuel are the kids having? Right. Obviously.
That's what I'm talking about. Right. We're at these big tournaments. There are like flats of Costco muffins, 1,000-calorie muffins for a child who just played a 20-minute volleyball game. Like, it's sort of insane. And we have to recognize that, we have trained parents or into thinking that this is the normal, or they don't know what they don't know. Now let's also recognize that every parent wants what's best for their child. Right. So if we say, here are the best ways, like the reason they're asking Jason about what's going on is his son is slaying. And they're like, what is that? I want that. So we always point positive, and we always invite kids to come over, and we'll always talk about it. And it is tricky. The first game, of course, is, making sure that the child loves. There's a whole lot of psychology there for sure. And I'll tell you, to let the cat out of the bag, Juliet and I are working on our next book, which is sports and performance for 12 to 18-year-olds. How do we shift control back to parents in a system where they don't feel like they have a lot of control? What can we control? How do we use sports as the ultimate scaffolding to teach kids how to be humans so we have a better society? That's our hypothesis, is that that's the promise of sport. But if your child is not sleeping, is eating canes and sucking down Gatorade and isn't really moving and training or recovering, or, has pain and just working through it, you're seeing that we're just, it's madness. And it really is. What we see is that it's the same thing for parents who are like, I'm going to run a marathon to lose weight. And then they do the marathon training for like 10 weeks. And then what happens? They have an ankle problem, they have a knee problem, they have a hip problem, they have a back problem, that's stuff. That's the same. We're applying the same logic to our kids. So it's crucial that we begin by saying, hey, if I'm a person in my community, I don't have to be responsible for my state. I have to be responsible for maybe one other family, or I'm going to volunteer to talk about this with my child's team or a couple families that we're engaged in. That's the first order, is to just get your family engaged. And then secondarily is bring along. Remember, every parent wants what's best for their child. Every parent has different degrees of training and experience, and they're doing the best they can.
I appreciate that. Put me on the pre-sale list for the book. I'm excited for that.
Hey, we're gonna have him back on when I'm super excited about that book, Kelly. I mean, I think there's so much to unpack with kids and sports and whatnot. You're kind of hitting some really interesting. Gabe and I have been talking about the sandbag a lot lately, and just the utility of it. Not necessarily just the affordability. Obviously, that's great, and the fact that you can travel with it. But the durability, I mean, you name it, there's so many benefits. But the fact that it's like an odd object, what role does just the fact that it's just like grimy play? Like, I'm curious your thought on this, because I was doing a sandbag workout yesterday, and my hand got a little bit cut up, nothing crazy, but it's just grimy. Oh yeah, Gabe still got his. Like, it's just something that's just, in a world that is so dedicated to keeping us comfortable, something about the sandbag allows us to be uncomfortable. And not to say that barbells and dumbbells are bad. Like, there's tons of utility there too. But like, the sandbag is just so dynamic in nature. Do you think that's the training tool that all kids or all families should be having for their kids? Because I hadn't really looked at it. I have not exposed my children enough to sandbags. If I'm being honest, based on this podcast, I'm probably going to start shifting that a little bit.
Here's what I think. It's awkward. It's cumbersome. It shifts around. It's not perfect. And so we get a lot of utility. As I had Caroline hold a sandbag and just be marching in place, she's like, I can't breathe. I'm like, I know. That's the point. Right? And she's like, but I need to breathe. I just sprinted. And I'm like, I know. That's the point. What's so great, number one, is that we can democratize that, right? A sandbag is within reach of any child playing a sport. And that's important. So suddenly, if I just have you carry it, put it on your shoulder, step up, we can create real training with sandbags. We can throw them, we can push them, we can pick them up, we can squat them. They're awkward, they're unilateral, they're a little bit gritty. You can just throw them down and dump them in the pile. You can take them on vacation. Like, this is the best and greatest tool there is. And for an adult, come on over to my house. We're going to push 400 watts on a bike. And then I'm going to make you pick up my 200-pound sandbag, and we're going to front squat in a bunch. And you're going to find out you're actually not a really good athlete. You're going to find out you don't know how to breathe and stabilize, and you're going to have to manage this 200-pound sandbag. It is so hard and so easily. Like, how much a 200-pound sandbag costs? Nothing, because they have free sand over by my park, where they just like, this is emergency sand, help yourself. And I just fill up my sandbags. Just the other day, I got myself a 150-pound sandbag with handles so I can just clean and jerk it, snatch it, and do all these things, right? I fill it up and then realize it's like a half-mile home. And I like carrying this 150, and I ultimately, like, I'm so blown out from the workout in the day, I have to leave the sandbag like in the street, go get my car and come back, because it's so gnarly. It's a gnarly tool. And I think, to your point, one of the cool things about the sandbag, and I think this is important, is that no one is afraid of the sandbag. If I hand your child a barbell, you're going to freak out. If I hand your child a sandbag, no one freaks out. If I give, you know what I mean? I think that's what's so cool is suddenly we have a mechanism to get tissue load exposure. Remember, the goal is coordination training plus resistance. And we can add a little bit to that sandbag. And suddenly you're like, oh, I have a 35-pound sandbag. I have a, I just looking at my pile of sandbags in the garage this morning, and it's impressive. And
Dude.
They're so cheap. So, and
I'm sending you a picture. I'm sending you a picture of my my men's club setup that I have in the backyard. But to your point, I had Caden doing a front squat workout with me last week with sandbags, and just watching the way that he's playing with it, it is different and it's unique because he has to move his shape. And I'm so glad you brought this up today. I have so many things I want to talk to you today on the podcast about. I know Gabe did too, but it's conversations like this I think are really great for me because it's just like, you know what? I've been thinking that, but then Kelly validated it. And now when I'm starting to talk to these kids, like, I think we just always want to kind of go this direction, but I think that there's a way that we could take it a little bit differently to make it more accessible. And I think the sandbag is a great example of that. So, and then the way that you described it, dude, like coordination under, testing coordination under load. You said it much more elegantly than that.
It's coordination training with resistance.
Dude, I love that. I think that's genius. It's like, hey, should kids be weight training? Nah. You know what I think we should be doing? Coordination training is super important. Do you agree? Yeah. We should just add a little bit of resistance to that just to test the system a little bit more. What do you think about that? Oh, that sounds like a great idea.
So,
have you ever seen a batting donut? No, we would never use a batting donut. Hello, that's what we're trying to do there. So, people have a framework. And again, it feels safe. You got to pick it up off the ground. There's no rack involved, right? And suddenly I'm like, oh, can we go step up on your front step? And now we have a real tool. If a long time ago, there was a CrossFit Journal article where Rutherford was making the case of dumbbell training. And I think even Greg said a long time ago, and the reason why dumbbells were such a part of the program is like, and there was even like a college. So 3 things happening at the same time, but there was a college that had their freshmen only train with dumbbells. And then the varsity athletes trained with barbells, and the dumbbell kids slayed everyone. Because if you're in a bad position, you can't lift the dumbbell because the dumbbell goes out of the ground. If you're in a barbell, you can Jenga yourself, origami yourself into a weird position. You can't do that with a dumbbell. And so the step further is that the sandbag, same thing. It's so easy to bail. It's so easy to drop, so easy to load. And look, if I give you 100 pounds, adults, put it on your shoulder, on one shoulder, and squat, you're going to see that that's real different than having 100-pound front squat or 100. Like, that's super different to just manage that load. And if we're talking about, again, can you coordinate your body? What's nice is that this is a way of us really doing that play of that mace work and exposure of figuring out how to carry things and step up over things. And what we'll see is that we have really functional athletes. And remember, the goal was to become bomb-proof so that we could go use our bodies. The goal was never that the gym became the only place where I enjoyed what my body can do. We love the gym. When there's times in our lives where we're so busy and all we can do is a 20-minute couplet in the gym, check the box. That's super great, but that was never the intention. The intention was to prepare my body so that I could do what I wanted to do when the time came.
We didn't pre-plan this at all, but this is coming out on the eve of us launching our own SAND program. So this is coming out on a Thursday, and on Tuesday after this comes out. So it's funny that you brought this up because we didn't pre-plan it, but we're super excited to make this.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Kelly.
Yeah, cat's out of the bag. We want to make this a big part of what we do at Train Hard because we've recognized the importance of it. Me personally, I think you'll appreciate this. I had a really bad herniation, L4, L5, L5S1, like everyone. And with sandbags and doing just essentially bear hug carries, like that became a part of my routine every single day. I completely got rid of that pain because it finally taught me to like actually engage everything without having so much like load on my back. Because before, all I was doing was, back squatting heavy with a barbell. Like, I've experienced firsthand the power of having something that's more of an odd object and like making me super strong, but in a way that just wasn't conventionally what I was doing before. I'm super grateful that I had that tool, because that was a gnarly injury that I really, really was frustrated about. And
well, Dr. Kelly had to bounce.
we lost Kelly for a second there.
But dude, hey, how cool is that? It's so funny. One of the things he just brought up that I think is super relatable is that he's saying, hey, put 100-pound sandbag on your back, and it feels a lot different than a 100-pound barbell. Remember when we were doing the workout in the garage a couple of weeks ago, and we were doing clean and jerks with the 80-pound sandbag, and you were saying like, dude, like if that was a 100-pound barbell, it would be nothing for you. Remember you saying that exactly the same way?
That's right. I mean, because we did, you were breaking them up into fives. We're talking, we did a workout, just how the sand also just feels so much more challenging in a way. Because me and Jason did a workout that we were testing for this program, and it was an 80-pound sandbag, and Jason Khalipa had to break it up into fives. It was a long chipper, it was 50 reps. And I told him afterwards, I was like, if that was a 95-pound barbell, like you would have done 20 unbroken to open up easily, and it would have been a breeze. So it's interesting how, objectively, you put both of them on the scale. One is literally 15 pounds lighter, but it feels like a completely different beast when you're trying to do the same movement.
100%. What I like about this is suddenly we're talking about using lighter loads and having a bigger stimulus. That's super cool. We're talking about your brain. Again, let me just say this to everyone. Your brain is a problem-solving machine. Let's give it to problem to solve. And I think one of the things that happened when we first all started training was that we had all these unique problems to solve. And then pretty soon, and don't take this offensively, everyone, CrossFit became step aerobics, high-intensity step aerobics with weights. You know exactly how many wall balls you can get done in a minute. You know exactly what a 145 split feels like. You know exactly what time. And so what we've said is, hey, look, you've started to become sophisticated. How are we going to continue to make the stimulus interesting and novel so that you can continue to solve the problems in a safe way, right? An interesting way, a way that, like, again, so safe, so easy to travel, so accessible, so democratized, and isn't just about more reps under more load. And I think that's one of the things I love. Do I still pull do I still power clean? Yes. Do I still deadlift? Yes. I love those things. But I think that this sandbag is the future. I will never do a thruster again without a sandbag. I will only sandbag thruster the rest of my life.
Dude, man, the timing of this is just really powerful, because I've been talking about this for a long time with Gabe about the power of sand, in particular on the side of the mats. So you're just talking about it on a completely different level with the kids, which I'm so happy about. But I saw the need in jiu-jitsu because a lot of these jiu-jitsu gyms don't have full gyms.
And you can't drop a weight.
And you can't drop weight. So I was like, well, dude, let's just bring some sandbags in and hit some tempo front squats to finish off our session, because we're getting so much aerobic, anaerobic, like high intensity training, but we're not getting any form of resistance training. I mean, you're trying to push a guy off you, but it's not the same. And so that was really the initial inspiration. And so we created a 10-week program. Yeah, man, dude. Kelly, I want to be respectful of your time. There was so much I want to talk to you about in regards to, raising girls. Gabe has 2 children, a boy and a girl. I have 2 children, a boy and a girl. But I think that there's just so much for us to unpack, because your daughters is it 15 and 18? Is that right?
15 and 19. 15 and 19.
Yeah. And so, dude, you've gone through it, man. And like, I need to know.
Have I gone through it? I didn't know. I thought I was still in it.
I mean, you're still in it, but
you're definitely still in it.
but I feel like there's so much more we can unpack about. I'd love to schedule again. I think this episode has been so much about like the fitness side, but I'd love to talk more about, you and Juliet writing books together, running businesses together, raising a family together, and raising really competent young women. It's been very inspirational for me knowing you for so many years and seeing what you've accomplished. So, again, that's what's on my docket that I really want to dive into with you as well.
Oh, I'd love to. I have the greatest partner of all time, J Star. She's the CEO of the Ready State, 3-time world champion. She's the mutant and
cancer survivor, just total badass.
2-time cancer survivor. So she is totally a badass. And, what we always say is we like our kids very much, but let us know in a few, like in their 20s, because we're still running this experiment, just like everything else. Here's our hypothesis. We're testing our hypothesis, and then we'll set our hypotheses loose in the world, and we'll see what happens. Can our kids feed themselves? Can they auto-regulate? Can they do their homework? We don't know. We'll find out.
Oh, man.
I love it, man. And I also want to talk to you next time a little bit about water polo. I know you're super immersed in that world now. Funny story. I swam in college. It was a D3 team, but we every year would have a meet against this D2 school that had a water polo program, but their water polo players would, also do swimming, and they would, on the sprint events, beat our sprinters with their head out of the water and no flip turn. And it was always like the most embarrassing thing on the planet. And it's just like, water polo players are on another level. But I remember that vividly because we were literally training to be fast in these events, and they would jump in, no goggles, head out of the water, and beat us in the 50s. So anyway.
Well, what I'll say is I'm a huge fan. Both my daughters have played. I can't even tread. I sink like a rock. I'm such a fan of the sport. And I'm just going to finish with a story that USA women's water polo team was just here at Berkeley playing Hungary in a friendly expedition match. And you may know that Flava Flav of Public Enemy has become the hype man for USA women's water polo. He's sponsoring the team.
What?
He's a girl dad. He got involved, and it's just been, he's bringing awareness. But so at this game, we were like, I wonder if Flava Flav will come. Well, Flav did come to the game, and I had a weird moment because I listened to a lot of Public Enemy when I was a freshman in college and a freshman in high school, and he's throwing out T-shirts to the crowd. And he throws a T-shirt. My daughter, goalie, Caroline, catches this T-shirt from Flava Flav, opens up the T-shirt, and it's the T-shirt of the goalie for the women's national team, Ashley Johnson, who is like she's like the greatest goalie in the history of women's water polo. And I was like, did my daughter just catch an Ashley Johnson shirt from Flava Flav? Like, obviously the singularity has just happened, and I should just walk away because that's the weirdest confluence of things I've ever seen. But what I'll tell you is that Georgia was decided she did not want to play in college. She's a smart kid. She just wanted to study economics and have a great time and go travel abroad. But she was captain of our water polo team in high school. And it's the greatest aerobic base, hand-eye coordination, contact, teamwork. I'm just absolute fan. If you have water polo in your community, get your kids involved. It's the greatest. And it can really augment. We have a bunch of kids who play other sports and just jump in, and because they understand soccer or they understand basketball, they can jump right into water polo.
Love it.
A buddy of mine is the assistant head coach over at San Jose State for the men's team, and he took me through a water polo workout a couple weeks ago. And I had a false impression of my abilities. I'm swimming in the water, like I'm feeling pretty good, like I'm whatever. And then I watched this guy, and the way that he basically like levitates out of the pool, I'm like, what the hell are you doing? Just the amount of energy they could create with their legs is just so impressive. So, and actually a lot of similarities to jiu-jitsu, believe it or not, in terms of like fighting for positions and underhooks and whatnot.
We part of our warm-up. So one of the things I do is I warm up. I'm in charge of the warm-ups for the women, and I'm very proud. We went to the national championship this year. We lost to UCLA, but it was a great battle. First time we've been there for a long time. Our head coach is Coralie Simmons, who's a legend. She won basically the Heisman Trophy. She was International Player of the Year. She played in the first Olympics for women. She's played in the first NCAA final. She was the first woman to coach an NCAA final in water polo. So she is. This is why I work for this woman boss. This sport, but one of the things that we do during our warm-ups is the sport was definitely caught in the 1990s, and we do a lot of breath hold fighting. We do a lot of hand position fighting, and we throw a medicine ball. Like, our girls' warm-up is so intense because what I saw was, and just imagine this, everyone, based on the conversation we're having, I don't think doing arm circles is preparing us to go have a jiu-jitsu fight in the water while we're trying to score on each other. Like, that's what it is. We sprint and then we fight. and then we sprint and then we fight. And I was like, I don't think your warm up is really preparing you for what you're doing. And now our women are basically getting into fights, battling, breath hold work, hypoxic work, throw, and like our warm ups are intense. We get in the water and we smash people. And it's been real fun to, again, have a laboratory where we can work on all of these things. And the output is, did we play better? Yes or no? Did I have a better life? Yes or no? Does my body feel better? Yes or no? And I'm really proud that we had a full bench with no injuries going into the NCAA finals this year.
Man.
Well, one last question, since the Olympics are coming up, Kelly, is the USA men's and women's team, are they like in the mix, underdogs going into the sport?
The men's team is amazing, but what I'll say is that the other men's teams are amazing. They're insane. Okay. Our women's team, the women's water polo in the world is incredible right now. It's incredible. But our women's team is the best team in the world. They've won. They should medal. I mean, everyone can surprise you, but they're amazing. Hey, G-Star.
Awesome. That'll be fun to watch.
Shake.
Well, brother, I appreciate you. We've already taken up too much of your time. I'll make sure to go. Everybody needs to check out a few things. Obviously, your books, of course, which we'll put some links in the podcast show notes, and check out the Ready State, and then check out when we bring you back on. I'm already going to schedule. I'm going to text you right after we're done here because I want to schedule already. Because we talk about this on the podcast all the time where we barely get into stuff we want to talk about. And they're like, oh, shit, we got to have another episode with them. So I'm going to text you. We're going to schedule it. And dude, I really, really appreciate your time. These episodes are always really meaningful to me because it's just like throwbacks to friends of mine that I've had for so many years. And we just get to have evolving conversation. I think one of the things that always inspires me about you is like, dude, I'm going to have a hypothesis. I'm going to test it. I'm going to retest it. And we're going to look back on it and be like, dude, was it right or wrong? And if
it was a terrible idea, let's ditch it.
Let's ditch it. And that's the way it should be. So, well, anyways, man, Gabe, any kind of closing remarks? We got the SAM program coming up, and that's what we got.
No, again, just thank you. I love these combos, man. Appreciate it, Kelly.
It's so great. And everyone, time to put the play back into your training. Cannot say that enough. Like, time to play around again.